a review for this book. It's 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson. So I have been seriously excited about reading this book. I discovered Peterson at the beginning of this year, and it was a whole new treasure trove of YouTube videos to watch. And what made Peterson stand out so much was that I had purposefully avoided him for so long. Peterson is a controversial figure, and the reason I had avoided him was because I had heard other people reference him, oh, that Jordan Peterson, and the image I had of him in my mind was of some sort of right-wing, misogynistic, white supremacist sort of man, and I told myself not to watch anything about him because it would just annoy me. I don't know why I capitulated in the end, but when I did watch a video with him in it, I was confused. I was thinking, is this the right Jordan Peterson? I had to Google him. Are there two Jordan Petersons? Because this man is nothing like everything I've heard about him. He's the opposite of that. He's a psychiatrist. I can't deny that my reading of this book has been tainted by the global emergency going on around us. It would have been impossible to lose myself in any book, but I have struggled to keep my mind on the book at times. And for anyone who's read the book, you may find that I jump around the book in my review, and that's because I've tried to roughly section it into the main themes. Usually I try to review a book in the order that I read it, but I found that with this one I was revisiting the same points too often, which became repetitive, and this review is long enough. So the book is called 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. And in it, Peterson is putting forward 12 summarised studies that can guide people and help to direct them towards a more fulfilled life. The individual rules are reduced to a catchy sentence, such as stand up straight with your shoulders back. And they often have a light-hearted introducing story, such as the lobsters or pets and owners taking their medications. And many of the chapters go into very deep ideas using religion and respected philosophers, psychologists and writers to further understand human behaviour. Peterson also uses anecdotal stories to further illustrate points. So personally, I liked this mix of different approaches. It meant that some very fundamental issues were explored in an accessible way and whilst retaining Peterson's personality and humour. Although at times I did feel the jumps between light-hearted and deep a little abrupt. This book wasn't quite what I thought it would be. It was more of a self-help book than the philosophical discussion I had expected. And I think that Peterson is a better speaker than shows in this book. I don't agree with everything Peterson says, and I definitely have my issues with the religious reinforcements. But I do agree with Peterson's direction. I genuinely think he's coming from a good place to try and help people, and that is quite novel. So while still reading the overture, I was already finding myself having moments of deep reflection as Peterson discussed the symbolism of the cross and of existence being a place of suffering and transformation. Good, very happy. Peterson talks a lot throughout the book about life being suffering. And this is a statement that I have struggled with as it grates against my previous ideas of happiness and contentment as the goal. The statement, life is suffering, reminds me of when I was growing up and people around me would say that life is shit and the quicker you accept that, the better. But that way of thinking led me to be a very depressed teenager. During some periods of deep reflection at that age, and with some chemical assistance, I came to the conclusion that the goal of life was to be happy, and that not only did I deserve this, I had a right to it and a responsibility to get it. As an adult, I have worked hard to be happy or content. I haven't been happy all the time, but I'm at a stage where there's nothing I need to make my life better. But I see now that when our needs are met or we get what we want, we do not sit back content. We continue to want. As we achieve our aims, our desires change. We look for suffering and transformation. I've also come to like the maxim that nothing worth having is easy. As Peterson points out, we need challenge, we need the struggle, we need the suffering and limitation. And I'll be the first to shout that I hate it, I'm drowning, and take me back to the shore. But I'll also be the first to crave the unknown and dive in again. That is life. We're fickle little bastards. Peterson talks about the vulnerabilities and limitations of life and how in the end, whatever we may wish for, it is those vulnerabilities and weaknesses in people that we really love. And when Peterson spoke about his daughter, I was heartbroken. I can't imagine what it is like to watch your child be really ill and not be able to make it stop. And he demonstrated this point very movingly. I found a lot of correlation between Peterson's rules for life and the messages of Seth as communicated by Jane Roberts. And that's reassuring, as Seth is supposed to be channeled straight out of the universe. So for Peterson to come to similar conclusions and to communicate them effectively is an achievement. They certainly have their different characters though. Peterson talks a lot about the word bringing order out of the empty chaos that existed before God spoke the world into creation. And it made me think about how meditation can be described as a connection to the silent void before words created duality. Duality is how we perceive the world. Things exist in opposition to each other: hot, cold, soft, hard, happy, sad, and of course the absolute religious definitions of good and evil. So from about rule 2, we travelled into the land of religion. And it's not a land I feel at home in. I'm not religious for many reasons, not least because it's been used as an excuse for the oppression and murder of millions of people throughout history. But that's a whole other rant. I'm not atheist. I don't believe in nothing. That really is illogical and more terrifying than any nightmare religion conjures up. I'm human, which means that even with all my intelligence and standing on the shoulders of amazing people in our history, there is no way that I can possibly know. My human nature means that I am always searching, always looking and wanting to learn more, never fully satisfied with an answer and never resting forever in one place. I'm not absolutist. Peterson refers to the Genesis story as if it holds absolute truth if it is interpreted correctly, but this didn't chime with me. I think that religious stories can be used to explain and teach, but in themselves they should be valued as nothing more than tools, or else they become the golden calf that Moses had his paddy about. God, divinity, the secret of the universe, the essence of Mother Nature, I believe they're all the same thing, and that it is within ourselves to find a connection to them because they are us. Order and chaos crafted together to create the magic that is living. The tools we use to understand ourselves can be religion, family, society, nature, music, machines, or animals. They're all tools for understanding who we are, what we are, and why we are. The book returns often to being deeply back into religion, and I'm out of my comfort zone every time. Even when Peterson makes a good point in reference to religion, I feel that it's cherry-picked and ignores the dogmatic totalitarianism that many religious people live by. I also wonder, does Peterson think that the Bible is supposed to be taken literally or symbolically? I had heard that ancient texts were written symbolically and that the readers were expected to use their intelligence to work out the deeper meaning. And one reason for this was that it was thought to be insulting to be literal. And this makes me wonder why Peterson keeps quoting the Bible for life so literally. The other reason for this symbolic writing was that the truth, the what it is, God, the life force, whatever you want to call it, cannot be directly characterized. So we can only see glimpses of it and gain our understanding through reflections, which cannot help being altered from the truth to some extent. The truth is that it's everything. Everything. That's too big to get our heads around, so we focus on glimpses at a time. And those reasonings at least gave me some respect for the Bible as a teller of stories with underlying messages. But I don't find Peterson's literal interpretation helpful, and there is too much emphasis on evil and punishment. I find it quite maudlin, and it misses much of the positivity that can be deemed from the Bible's explanations of life. At times, this book, it gets so religious, and even worse than that, it's really pessimistic. And isn't that the worst part of religion? So, for example, Rule 7, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient. It's very negative. Suffering, evil, blah, blah. So let's look at this another way. Whatever version of events you use, and I'll use Peterson's Adam and Eve that he seems obsessed with. Peterson explains that Adam and Eve live in unsinful paradise. The fruit is knowledge. When it is eaten, we become self-conscious and are expelled into the world of good and evil. And apparently this knowledge makes us sinful as we learn about all the horrible things we can do. Okay, so to me, what the Adam and Eve story represents is the sinless paradise before knowledge is our primal animal selves, before we had our oversized frontal lobes that overthink everything. With knowledge came the ego. We now view ourselves from an outside perspective, and this affects our decision making. With our new ability to understand instead of know, and overthink instead of be, we now live within the realms of time. Past and future affect our decisions in the present. Through this, we've been able to manipulate the material world as we feel ourselves detached from it, but it has also allowed us to feel guilt about the past and worry about what might be. Paradise and ignorance are lost, yes, because we are not purely animal anymore. I don't think we're any better than animals, but we are different through our large brain, through our observations, through our need to understand what we will never again know for certain. The fruit is the succulent knowledge of duality, good and bad, up and down. And it's this fascination with this contrast that still guides us creatively today. I don't think the fall merely represents self-consciousness and the knowledge of good and evil in a sinful way. I think it represents all conscious awareness and all intellectual and practical knowledge. It's a description of our neurological changes as we move from ape to human. Doesn't that sound more reasonable than these morbid ideals of heaven and hell and sacrifice and suffering? The Bible was composed by people, and people are not infallible. Referring to every sentence as if it's the blueprint for life, I don't think that's the answer. Use it as a tool, use it positively, but don't let it make you feel ashamed. Don't let it scare you with nightmares of evil and devils. Take the Bible philosophically. We all have some naughtiness and some divine in us. Either taken to extremes becomes boring at the least, and potentially very dangerous. Human evil, such as murder and worse torture, are terrifying, yes. But in my belief, they are much more a perversion of the norm than how we are generally driven or wired to act. We are reasonable creatures, although unreasonable situations can certainly bring out a very dark side in us, as they can with any predatory animal. I don't buy Peterson's conclusion that Nazi or Russian state representatives behaved so abominably because they were acting out their natural human capacity for willful evil. Not many of them, at least. I believe that these people were motivated by, one, the addictive effect of perverse power over another human, which in its way is a short circuit in the brain, but also a powerful driver for evil behaviour. Two, I believe that these people lived in utter fear of the people they oppressed, and that is a completely different area to discuss. Peterson's Genesis examination also felt negative to women. Not only is Eve cut out of Jesus' divinity, she was also the afterthought when God created man, and then through her is brought the slipping in of chaos. Whether or not Peterson is misogynistic, this Bible story has been used to excuse centuries of misogyny against women. The full title of this book is The 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. So I really felt that Peterson labelling women as chaos will not do much to combat his label as a misogynist. And the, oh, you gave us birth, necessary evil add-on does not make it better. I've heard Peterson defend this chaos label as being only symbolic, but he refers to it a lot, and it would be very difficult not to make the link of women as chaos. Peterson repeatedly talks about the need for order, which he describes as symbolically male, without remembering that order needs fresh chaos to not oversimplify itself. Peterson references the yin-yang symbol and talks about the fine line to be walked between chaos and order, but then refers again to chaos being outside of us, trying to get in to our order. And I felt that there was an overemphasis on order being what we want all the time, and chaos being this terrible thing that we would avoid if we could. People can have an ordered, routine and happy life, nothing they'd want to change, yet they can easily become miserable or depressed because we need some chaos in our lives. Love is chaos, children are chaos, and whilst the chaos of them drives us crazy, they also make us feel alive. In Rule 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding, Peterson talks about the differences between men and women again and fails again, describing men as order and women as chaos again. And then even more confusingly, he states that consciousness always symbolically masculine. And I just thought, oh, come on. To me, consciousness means mind, thinking. Women are always recognised as the mind, where men are the physical. Men are strength and force. Women are persuasion and manipulation. At least give us that. I mean, women's intuition, for fuck's sake. I also felt that there was an overuse of Disney films as references here. Seriously, they're hardly blueprints for life. I felt that Peterson's referral here to women's negative force were to the archetypal hag, and I want to explore that a bit further. Let's talk about women as the chaos of nature. Fair enough. Nature is unpredictable, though I wouldn't call it chaos. And yes, women do seem to have a different and perhaps closer relationship with nature. And I think this is partly to do with their ability to summon up the inner force of the earth and bring forth life. There is also a submission that comes with becoming a mother, both in the act of birth and also the vocation that follows. Whereas to master and control the material world, men must grit their teeth and plough through nature's boundaries. For a woman to give birth and then attend to her baby appropriately, she must relax her jaw and allow nature's laws to guide her. That isn't chaos. The young woman is a flower of nature. The mother is womanhood shining in the light of the sun. The hag is a return to nature, the nature that grew the first two, as well as a new realm for them to become. And for many women, it's the time of retraction from the flower and the fruit back into the plant. There is also a liberty from the pressure of beauty and the submission of motherhood. Perhaps the reason that the fairy tales and Disney like to demonize this woman is because of their own fear of her. They don't know her. She is not the virgin who is the responsibility of her father. She is not the mother who is the responsibility of her husband. She is a woman on other terms, and it isn't chaos. I found myself asking, why does Peterson seem to hate women? I really don't think he does hate women. I just think he's trying to make sense of the world. And I do think that he's being very honest about what he thinks, and I respect that, whether or not I agree with it. But I do think he does something which a lot of people do, and that is to talk about the opposite sex in sweeping generalities, which become oversimplified and derogatory, just as when some feminists say that all men are misogynists. I think it would be better to accentuate that as men and women we are different, but also fundamentally the same. We're two sides of the same coin, rather than two opposing winds that meet along the borderline. Our lights shine from the same source, although they shine through different filters. And even so, our colours cross over and blend more than they don't. Moving on. I loved hearing about how Peterson grew up. I like that personal touch, and I'm also nosy about people's upbringings. Peterson explains really well about how social groups can shape our expectations and ambition. And he points out some stark home truths about friends and family who may well not want the best for us. One of those dragons under the rugs that he talks about more later on. Peterson also explains very well the importance of taking responsibility for your life and actions. And I thought that this rule, number 3, make friends with people who want the best for you, was excellent. My highlighter went crazy. In rule 5, do not let your kids do anything that you dislike. That makes you dislike them, sorry. We hear Peterson on parenting. So, in fairness, I agreed strongly with some of his points. I think many parents are too scared to say no to their kids. I think reasonable boundaries are a good thing. And I think it is responsible parenting to prepare your children for the adult world, even if you don't agree with the way that things are done in that adult world. But I don't think things are all bad nowadays with parenting, just as I don't think that the way things were done in the past was faultless. And I could write an essay on why I would never have taken the action that Peterson boasted about to get the 2-year-old to sleep in the cot. Peterson likes to talk a lot about social hierarchies and why they are important. And there is a tone in our culture that says that ambition is something to be embarrassed about and that success is shameful somehow. But what are we without ambition? What does it say about you if you don't want to be successful? Peterson talks about how feeling like the loser can make you behave like one and even attract overbearing, dominant behaviours from others, and vice versa. Essentially, Peterson is saying that you need to take control of your destiny and don't allow past disempowering experiences to continue to hold back your confidence. Peterson also talks about how not standing up for yourself when you are able to is a self-detrimental error of judgment. I found Rule 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticise the world, very religious again and pessimistic. But getting past that, I thought the last section of this chapter was really good and that it made up for the rest of the chapter. It's really about being a grown-up, taking responsibility, not being a victim. It's like speaking up when you need to. And I think there's a big gap in our society for doing this. Our favourite way to communicate seems to be online. And there's a lot of spouting current rhetoric and shouting down any dissension. But there are not a lot of people standing up and saying what they know to be true. Rule 8 was tell the truth or at least don't lie. And I can honestly say that I try to live by this. But I definitely rely on just say nothing a little too much. And now Peterson's Rule 10, be precise in your speech, tells me why this behaviour of omission is not good enough. I know this already, and thanks for giving me nowhere to hide. I think this is as much about being a grown-up as well. And that means calling things out and not just walking by, even though that means we'll place ourselves in the firing line sometimes. I really liked Peterson's demonstration of this in the story about the dragon. That is that little niggle that you ignore, but every time you ignore it, it gets bigger, until in the end, you're having to work your life around it and it's become a big, scary dragon that you don't want to start a fight with. This is so true, and I'm taking heed for areas where I need to improve. Peterson spoke about nihilism and fatalism, and what I think is a sort of suicidal acceptance of what is coming that many people live with. I assume Peterson has struggled with the idea that life is pointless and suicide is a logical escape from the pain or an end to the pain you're causing. And I get that. I've been there myself. And if you're an overthinker, which I am, and I assume Peterson is, it's very difficult to let go of that conclusion once you've made it. Personally, I try to focus on the opportunities and the fact that whatever you want to call it has worked so hard to get us here. And we have a duty to that, whatever it is, to damn well live and thrive in our situation. In Rule 10, be precise in your speech, Peterson made some really good points about relationships and the respect as well as challenge that is needed to maintain healthy relationships. And the need for honest communication cannot be overstated. And that doesn't mean being an arse and saying, oh, at least I'm honest. It means saying the difficult things and asking the difficult questions and listening to what's difficult to hear. Marriage is hard work. It's two people living and growing together. Keeping that growth intertwined is challenging, but it will be the strength against the storms in life that will inevitably come. In the book, Peterson talks about the need to care about yourself, and this is something that so many of us neglect to do. Speaking about yourself as if you were speaking about a friend can allow us to be more forgiving of ourselves. And this is so fundamental because when we fail to forgive and love ourselves, it's much more difficult to extend these necessities to others. He also talks about the need to know yourself. And this can mean listening to yourself to work out who you really are and what you really want. You can do this most easily by talking honestly to someone else, or by going through it really honestly and clearly on your own. Don't assume that you know the answers. Question yourself on them. And I thought he spoke on these areas convincingly. In Rule 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Peterson discusses the need for danger in boys and girls, but particularly in boys, to push their boundaries and develop their skills. And I do believe that boys generally have this more physical need, probably because the physical is symbolically male. I agree completely in this need for danger, and when my children do things such as horse riding and the things they do on their bikes, it terrifies me. But I know that it's really important for them, and I bite my tongue from continuously saying, be careful. And when they say, look, Mum, I look over and invariably do not watch them because my heart is in my mouth. If possible, I'm not around when they're doing these things because my maternal worry is unhelpful. They're taking risks. It could all go wrong. It could even be the end of the world. But that isn't what they should be focused on. Living in fear doesn't make healthy people. Doing things out of our comfort zone makes us feel alive. It challenges us. It gives us confidence. And not just in the area where we're pushing ourselves. It allows us to see where else we could expand our horizons. Learning to get back up again when you've been hurt is also an incredibly important lesson. Peterson also talks here about being cautious of people who seem driven by safety or attempts to help those worse off than them. And I can't help agreeing with him, although I don't think everyone in these situations has a sinister motive. But you do have the Jobsworths who, in Peterson's example, choose to make a public area look ugly in an attempt to prevent behaviour that could leave a public area looking ugly. And I can think of a million examples of this in many areas of our lives, and I could go on massive rants about some of them. There's often a proclaimed good intention behind these actions, but also a complete lack of common sense, and often an unacceptable level of damage that is directly or indirectly caused. But you try arguing with someone who has safety as their reason. They have a moral high ground and they won't budge from it. Peterson talks about the need for men to be successful in their lives in at least some areas in order for them to be the kind of man that a woman wants to be married to. That's a controversial thing to say nowadays. True, but controversial. He also talks about how boys are not getting what they need to become successful men. Again, controversial, again true, but also not straightforward. So, in conclusion, I was looking forward to reading this book so much, but it hasn't quite lived up to my expectations. Peterson is an incredibly intelligent, well-read man, and I think he makes some very good and important points. But I think he falls into a trap when he talks about women, and that can come across as sexist. And I feel that his talents are put to waste when he bangs this religious drum so hard, and in my opinion, incorrectly. I think that Peterson is on a journey to find out, to understand, and if he possibly can, to help, and that's all positive. I think he has a lot to give, and there was a lot that was great in the book, but I also thought that he got caught down some rabbit holes. If people want fuller, and in my opinion better, explanations of life and the meaning of life, and some explanations of how the Bible has attempted to help with this, I recommend looking up Alan Watts and the Seth Speaks books. I've found that they've answered my questions more comprehensively and they've made more sense to me, and I would recommend them over this book. Okay. I also want to take this opportunity to wish Jordan B. Peterson and his family the best of health. And also to send wishes of good health to the Prime Minister, who's currently in hospital fighting the coronavirus, and to everyone else affected by this current situation. It's a very strange time. Okay, here's the book again. Okay, thank you.